And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing the next storm here, tracking in toward the Pribilof Islands there and deepening as it comes eastward. Front pushing gale force winds and rain into the southwest coast toward morning and across eastern Aleutians tonight. Rain spreading into Bristol Bay. Dry in advance of that as the high pressure that was out over the western and southwest part of the state today shifts eastward. And still some lingering showers, but still an improvement over today over the central interior. And this system slowly moving should be out of the area tomorrow from partly sunny, dry day for the southeast coast. And then storm warnings out for the Pribilof Islands and good southwest gales here coming into Bristol Bay. And that'll kick a high surf advisory for the coastal areas of Bristol Bay for tomorrow night, Tuesday night into early Wednesday. Otherwise, the front rain pushing eastward as far east possibly as Yakutat late in the day. Dry up over the northern interior, but still some scattered showers along that weak trough there just south of the Brooks Range and improving back to the west there. And as you can see, high pressure starts to build in over the eastern Bering Sea for much lighter winds as that storm pulls off to the east and weakens over the Gulf of Alaska on Wednesday, with rain for the southeast coast and a lot of moisture here over the central and southern interior, but northwest flow drying it out again in the afternoon here. Possible clearing Cook Inlet, definitely for Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula. Coastal water forecast, northwest winds 20 knots for the southern coast of the Panhandle for tomorrow. Same thing for Clarence Strait, and lighter west-northwest breezes over the central and northern inner channels. Northwest 15 knots on the central coast, variable winds at 10 knots on the north coast. Then for Wednesday, for the north coast, south to east winds at 15 knots, and the central coast, mostly southerly winds at 20 knots, seas around 7 feet. And along the coast of Prince of Wales Island, along the west coast there, southwest winds 15 knots, seas 5 feet. Clarence Strait, southeast at 15 and south 20 knots for Stevens Passage with higher gusts, and south at 20 knots for Lynn Canal. Prince William Sound tomorrow, east winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet. North Gulf Coast, we've got entire North Gulf Coast. There's south to southeast winds in the forecast at 15 knots. Seas only 4 feet though. Small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, south at 25 and southeast 25 knots for Kamishak Bay. Cook Inlet, south to southeast winds 10 to 20 knots. And then for Wednesday, Cook Inlet's west-southwest winds 10 to 15 knots. Stronger winds coming into Kamishak Bay, west at 30 knots, northwest 30 knots for the Barren Islands. Prince William Sound, light westerly breeze at 10 knots, and for the North Gulf Coast, west or west-southwest breeze at 15 knots. And for Kodiak Island tomorrow, south winds 20 to 25 knots, seas 7 feet. And gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula. Southwest winds 35 to 45 knots with seas up to 15 feet. Bristol Bay, southwest wind 30 knots with 7-foot seas. And then for the day Wednesday, Alaska Peninsula, west winds 25 to 30 knots with seas up to 14 feet. 14-foot seas with west winds at 30 knots for Bristol Bay. Kodiak Island, west winds 35 knots, seas 11 feet. And for the Fox Islands tomorrow, gale warnings. Southwest winds, mostly 40 knots with seas running up to 14 feet. Adak and Atka, gale warnings, west winds 35 knots, 10 to 14-foot seas there. And then winds slowly diminishing as you head west from Kiska to Shemya, west at 25. And for the day on Wednesday, winds swing around back to the southeast or east-southeast here at 30 knots for the areas west of Adak. Otherwise, Adak and Atka, southeast at 26-foot seas there. Lighter winds for the eastern Aleutians, but still out of the west at 25 knots blowing across Unalaska Island, and seas subsiding to 7 to 9 feet. And for the southwest coast, east to southeast winds, gale force east to southeast winds here tomorrow. 35 knots. Storm warnings for the Pribilof Islands. Southwest winds 50 knots. Seas 18 feet. Northeast at 35 for St. Matthew Island. East at 25 for St. Lawrence Island. And east at 20 for Norton Sound. And for Wednesday, Pribilof Islands, west winds 20 knots. Seas 9 feet. Southwest at 20 for St. Matthew Island. Northwest winds there along the southwest coast of St. Lawrence Island at 25 knots with 6 to 8 foot seas. Norton Sound, northwest at 20. Heading north at Chukchi Sea tomorrow, north winds 10 to 20 knots. Western Arctic coast, northeast at 15. Pretty light northeast winds at 5 knots for the central coast, and west winds 10 to 15 for the eastern coastline. And then for the day on Wednesday, northeast and northwest winds up here for the central and eastern Arctic coast, only at 10 knots, seas only 2 feet. Light east winds at 5 knots for the western North Gulf coast, and north-northwest 15 to 20 knots for the Chukchi Sea.